The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the Ashford mansion, making everything inside look like it belonged in a magazine. And honestly, it did. Victoria Ashford had spent years making sure every corner of her home was perfect. The white marble floors sparkled. The crystal chandelier in the entrance hall caught the light just right. Even the flowers in the vases were arranged by a professional who came twice a week. Victoria stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her pearl necklace. She'd just gotten back from a charity luncheon at the country club, the kind of event where women in expensive dresses talked about helping others while sipping champagne that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. She smoothed down her cream-colored dress and checked her makeup one more time. Perfect as always. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. Another text from one of the ladies at the luncheon, probably sharing photos or gossiping about who said what. Victoria smiled to herself. This was her world, and she'd worked hard to build it. Well, her husband Daniel had built it with his business success, but she'd crafted their image, their reputation, their place in society. She thought about her daughter, Lily, who was probably playing somewhere in the house. At 7 years old, Lily was Victoria's entire universe. Every parent says that about their child, but Victoria meant it differently. Lily wasn't just her daughter. She was her legacy, her second chance at perfection. Victoria had plans for that girl. The right schools, the right friends, the right everything. Nothing and nobody would ever hurt her baby. The house was quiet. Too quiet, actually. Usually she could hear Lily's voice chattering away, or the sound of her toys or something. Victoria felt a small flutter in her chest. She walked out of her bedroom and down the hallway, her heels clicking on the floor. "Lily?" she called out. No answer. Victoria's pace quickened slightly. The house was huge, sure, but Lily always answered when she called. She checked her daughter's bedroom first. Empty. The playroom. Empty. The reading nook by the stairs. Empty. Her heart started beating faster. She told herself she was being ridiculous. The house was safe. They had security. They lived in the best neighborhood in the city. Nothing bad could happen here. She walked down the grand staircase, one hand trailing along the polished banister. That's when she heard it, a soft voice, gentle and low, coming from the living room, and then another sound that made her blood run cold, her daughter crying. Victoria's expensive shoes seemed to move on their own, carrying her quickly toward the sound. Her mind raced. Who was in her house? What was happening to Lily? Every protective instinct she had as a mother kicked into overdrive. She reached the doorway of the living room and stopped dead. There was Helen, their housekeeper, kneeling on the floor next to Lily. The older woman's dark hands were touching her daughter's face, cupping it gently. Lily's cheeks were wet with tears, her little face red and blotchy from crying. Helen was speaking softly, words Victoria couldn't quite hear, but the intimacy of the moment, the closeness, the touching, it all hit Victoria like a physical blow. Something snapped inside her. She didn't think, didn't pause, didn't ask a single question. She just moved. "Get your hands off my daughter." The words came out as a scream, harsh and loud in the peaceful room. Both Helen and Lily jumped, startled, but Victoria was already there, grabbing Helen by the shoulder and yanking her away from Lily. The older woman stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock. "How dare you?" Victoria's voice was shaking. "How dare you touch her?" "Mrs. Ashford, please, I was just—" Helen started, but Victoria cut her off. "I don't want to hear it." Victoria's hand flew up before she even realized what she was doing. The slap connected with Helen's cheek with a sound that seemed to echo through the room. Helen's head snapped to the side, and she brought her own hand up to her face, more from shock than pain. "Mommy, no," Lily screamed, but Victoria barely heard her. "Get out," Victoria hissed at Helen. "Get out of my house right now." Helen stood there for a moment, her hand still pressed to her cheek. There was something in her eyes, something that might have been sadness or disappointment, but definitely not anger. She looked at Lily, who was crying even harder now, and then back at Victoria. "Mrs. Ashford, if you would just let me explain." "Explain?" Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Explain what?" "I saw you. I saw you with your hands on my daughter. I saw her crying. What else is there to explain?" "Please," Helen said quietly, her dignity somehow still intact despite everything. "Please just listen to your daughter. Don't you tell me what to do with my child," Victoria shot back. "You're fired. I want you out of this house in the next 5 minutes, or I'm calling the police." Lily was sobbing now, actually sobbing, trying to say something through her tears. "Mommy, you don't understand. She was helping me. Hush, baby, it's okay." Victoria moved to her daughter, trying to pull her into a hug, but Lily jerked away. That hurt, but Victoria told herself the girl was just scared, confused by what had happened. Helen moved slowly toward the door. She picked up her purse from where it sat on a side table, the same purse she brought to work every day for the past 3 months. 3 months she'd worked for the Ashfords. 3 months of cleaning their home, doing their laundry, making their meals. And this is how it ended. At the doorway, Helen turned back one more time. Her cheek was starting to show a red mark where Victoria had struck her. She looked at Lily with such genuine concern that it almost gave Victoria pause. Almost. "Take care, sweet girl," Helen said softly to Lily. Then she looked at Victoria, and there was no hatred in her eyes, just a deep sadness. "I pray you'll listen to her, Mrs. Ashford, really listen." And then she was gone. The front door closed quietly behind her, and suddenly the house felt enormous and empty. Lily was still crying, but differently now. Not the scared crying from before, but something deeper, something that sounded almost like grief. "Baby, it's okay," Victoria said, reaching for her daughter again. "She's gone. You're safe now." But Lily pulled away again, harder this time. "You don't understand," the little girl wailed. "You didn't even ask. You didn't listen." "Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but Mommy had to protect you. You'll understand when you're older." "I don't want to understand," Lily shouted, and then she ran. Her small feet pounded on the stairs as she raced up to her room. A moment later, Victoria heard the door slam. She stood alone in the living room, her heart still racing, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She looked around at the perfect space with its perfect furniture and perfect decorations. Everything in its place. Everything under control. She walked to the window and looked out at the manicured lawn, the professionally trimmed hedges, the fountain in the center of the circular driveway. Through the gates at the end of the property, she could just barely see Helen walking down the street, her purse clutched to her side, her shoulders straight despite everything. Victoria turned away from the window. Her phone was buzzing again. She picked it up and saw messages from 3 different friends. Without really thinking about it, she started typing. "You won't believe what just happened. Had to fire the housekeeper. Caught her with her hands all over Lily." The girl was crying. "Thank God I came home when I did." The responses came quickly. "Oh my God, Victoria. Are you serious? Did you call the police? You must be so shaken up. Your poor baby." Yes, her poor baby. Victoria looked toward the stairs where Lily had disappeared. She should probably go check on her, make sure she was okay. But maybe the girl needed some time to calm down first. Children got emotional about things they didn't understand. Lily had probably gotten attached to Helen over the past few months. She didn't understand why Mommy had to send her away, but she would eventually. Victoria walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine, even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. Her hand was still trembling slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips. She told herself it was just the shock of it all, the fear of what might have happened if she hadn't come home early. She thought about Helen's face, that look of sadness and disappointment. The way she'd said, "Please listen to your daughter," as if Victoria was the one who'd done something wrong. The nerve of it. Victoria took another sip of wine and pulled out her phone again. She started searching for housekeeping services, the kind that did full background checks and had insurance. She'd need someone to start as soon as possible. The house wouldn't clean itself. Upstairs, she could hear Lily still crying in her room. The sound was muffled but persistent. Victoria thought about going up there, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Lily had pulled away from her. Maybe it was the look in her daughter's eyes, like she didn't even recognize her own mother. No, that was ridiculous. Lily was just confused. Tomorrow, or maybe the day after, everything would go back to normal. They'd get a new housekeeper, someone better, someone more appropriate. Lily would forget all about Helen. Children were resilient like that. Victoria finished her wine and set the glass in the sink. She looked around the pristine kitchen, at the gleaming appliances and spotless countertops. Everything was fine. Everything was under control. She'd protected her daughter, just like any good mother would. So why did she still feel so unsettled? She pushed the feeling away and went to check on dinner. Daniel would be home from his business trip in 2 days. She'd tell him what happened and he'd understand. He'd probably be angry that she hadn't called the police, actually. He was even more protective of Lily than she was. Everything was fine. She'd done the right thing. She'd done the right thing. Victoria repeated it to herself like a mantra as the afternoon faded into evening, as Lily's crying finally stopped, as the house settled into silence. She'd done the right thing, but somewhere in the back of her mind, Helen's words echoed. Please listen to your daughter. Victoria pushed them away and started planning what she'd make for dinner. The next morning, Victoria woke up feeling like she'd barely slept. She had actually, but it was that restless kind of sleep where you're half aware of everything, tossing and turning all night. She reached over to Daniel's side of the bed, forgetting for a moment that he was still away on his business trip. The empty space reminded her that she'd have to handle everything alone for another day. She got up and went through her morning routine, the same one she'd perfected over years. Shower, skincare, makeup, hair. By the time she was done, she looked like herself again. Put together. In control. She studied her reflection in the mirror and pushed away the memory of yesterday. Today was a new day, but when she went to wake Lily for school, everything came rushing back. Her daughter's room was dark, the curtains still drawn. Lily was curled up in bed facing the wall. Usually the girl was already awake by this time, chattering about what she wanted for breakfast or what game she wanted to play. Lily,
"Honey, time to get up for school," Victoria said softly.
sitting on the edge of the bed, Lily didn't move. Come on, sweetheart. You'll be late, still nothing. Victoria reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder and Lily flinched away from her hand. Actually flinched, like she was afraid of her own mother. Lily, what's wrong? Victoria tried to keep her voice calm, but she felt a spike of frustration. Are you feeling sick? I don't want to go to school, Lily mumbled, her face still toward the wall. Well, that's not really an option, is it? Victoria stood up and walked to the windows, pulling the curtains open. Sunlight flooded the room and Lily buried her face in her pillow. I mean it, the little girl said, her voice muffled. I don't feel good. Victoria walked back to the bed and pressed her hand against Lily's forehead. No fever. She checked her daughter's face, looking for any signs of illness, but the girl looked fine, healthy, just tired and puffy-eyed from crying so much yesterday. You're not sick, Victoria said firmly. You're upset about yesterday and I understand that, but life goes on. We need to get you ready for school. Lily finally turned over and the look she gave her mother was something Victoria had never seen before. It wasn't the usual childhood defiance or even anger. It was disappointment, deep, sad disappointment. You hurt Miss Helen, Lily said quietly. I protected you, Victoria corrected her, and we're not going to talk about this anymore. What happened yesterday is over. Miss Helen is gone and we'll find someone new. I don't want someone new. Lily's voice cracked. I want Miss Helen. Well, that's not possible. Victoria stood up, signaling that the conversation was finished. Get dressed. I'll make you breakfast. She left the room before Lily could argue anymore. In the kitchen, she made pancakes, Lily's favorite, hoping food would help smooth things over. But when Lily finally came downstairs dressed but with her hair uncombed and her shoes on the wrong feet, she barely touched her plate. Eat, Victoria urged. You need energy for school. Lily pushed the pancakes around with her fork but didn't take a bite. Victoria felt her patience wearing thin. She'd done everything right. She'd protected her daughter from an inappropriate situation. Why was Lily acting like she was the bad guy here? The drive to school was silent. Lily stared out the window and Victoria didn't push for conversation. When they pulled up to the school's drop-off area, Victoria leaned over to kiss her daughter goodbye, but Lily was already out of the car, her backpack bouncing against her small shoulders as she walked away without looking back. Victoria sat there for a moment, watching her daughter disappear into the school building. Other mothers were dropping off their kids, chatting with each other, smiling and laughing. Everything looked so normal. So why did she feel like something was terribly wrong? She shook her head and drove home. She had things to do. She needed to find a new housekeeper for one thing. The house was already starting to show signs of neglect. There were dishes in the sink from last night's dinner, and she'd noticed dust on the mantel in the living room this morning. Back home, she made herself coffee and opened her laptop. She started browsing housekeeping services, reading reviews, checking credentials. She sent out 3 inquiries before lunch. While she waited for responses, she called her friend Monica. "Hey, I was just thinking about you," Monica answered. "How's Lily doing after yesterday?" "She's fine," Victoria said automatically. "Just a little shaken up, but she'll be okay." "I still can't believe that happened in your own home," Monica said, and Victoria could hear the scandalized delight in her voice. "Did you report it?" "Report what exactly?" Victoria asked, suddenly feeling defensive. "Well, the incident. With the housekeeper and Lily. You said she was crying." "I handled it," Victoria said. "She's gone. That's what matters." "But Victoria, what if she does it to someone else? Don't you think you have a responsibility to warn other families?" Victoria hadn't thought about that. The idea made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite name. "I'll think about it," she said, wanting to change the subject. "Listen, can you recommend a good housekeeping service? I need someone to start as soon as possible." Monica gave her 2 names and they chatted for a few more minutes before hanging up. Victoria looked at the information she'd written down, but something kept her from making the calls right away. Instead, she found herself thinking about Helen again. The woman had worked for them for 3 months. In that time, she'd been nothing but professional, reliable. She showed up on time every day, did her work without complaint, and was always respectful. Lily had liked her. Really liked her. The girl would follow Helen around sometimes, chattering away while the older woman cleaned or did laundry. Helen always listened patiently, asking questions, making Lily feel heard. Victoria shook her head. That didn't matter now. What mattered was what she'd seen yesterday. Helen's hands on Lily's face. Lily crying. That was enough, wasn't it? The day dragged on. Victoria tried to clean the house herself, but she kept getting distracted. She'd start wiping down the kitchen counters and then find herself staring out the window. She'd go to vacuum the living room and end up standing in the exact spot where everything had happened yesterday. When it was time to pick up Lily from school, Victoria was actually relieved. At least it gave her something to do, somewhere to be. But Lily was quiet again on the drive home. She answered Victoria's questions with 1 or 2 words, nothing more. When they got home, she went straight to her room and closed the door. "Lily, don't you want a snack?" Victoria called after her. "Not hungry," came the muffled reply. Victoria stood at the bottom of the stairs, feeling helpless. This wasn't like her daughter at all. Lily was usually so bright, so cheerful, so full of energy. Now it was like living with a ghost of her child. She tried to tell herself it would pass. Kids were resilient. They bounced back from things. By next week, Lily would probably forget all about Helen and everything would return to normal. That evening, Victoria made Lily's favorite dinner. Chicken nuggets, French fries, and apple slices cut into fun shapes. She even let Lily eat in front of the TV, something she usually didn't allow. But Lily picked at her food and barely watched the show playing on the screen. "Sweetie, you need to eat," Victoria said, sitting next to her on the couch. "I'm not hungry. You've barely eaten all day. You're going to make yourself sick." Lily didn't respond. She just kept staring at the TV, her eyes focused but not really seeing anything. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. "Baby, please talk to me. Tell me what's wrong." For a moment, she thought Lily wouldn't answer, but then the little girl turned to look at her and there were tears in her eyes. "You didn't listen," Lily said simply. "What do you mean?" "Yesterday. You didn't listen to me. You didn't ask what happened. You just yelled and hurt Miss Helen and made her go away." Victoria felt her defenses rising. "I saw what I saw, Lily. I had to protect you. But I was trying to tell you." Lily's voice rose, the first real emotion Victoria had seen from her all day. "I was trying to explain, but you wouldn't listen. You never listen." "That's not fair," Victoria said, feeling her own anger building. "I always listen to you." "No, you don't." Lily was crying now, really crying. "You just think you know everything, but you don't. You don't know what happened. You don't know anything." She jumped off the couch and ran upstairs again. This time, Victoria heard the lock click on her bedroom door. Victoria sat alone on the couch, surrounded by the uneaten dinner and the cheerful sounds of the TV show still playing. She felt tears pricking at her own eyes, which was ridiculous. She was the adult. She was the mother. She'd done what any mother would do in that situation. So why did she feel so awful? Her phone rang and she grabbed it eagerly, hoping for a distraction. It was Daniel finally calling from his trip. "Hey, honey," he said, and just the sound of his voice made her feel a little better. "How are my girls?" "We're fine," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady. How's the trip going? Exhausting but productive. I should be home tomorrow evening. I can't wait to see you both, Victoria almost told him then. Almost explained what had happened with Helen, about how Lily was acting, about how nothing felt right anymore. But something held her back. We can't wait either, she said instead. Lily misses you. Everything okay there? You sound stressed. Just tired. You know how it is. They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, and then Daniel had to go to a dinner meeting. After they hung up, Victoria sat in the silence of her perfect house and felt utterly alone. She thought about going upstairs and trying to talk to Lily again, but what would she say? She couldn't take back what happened. She couldn't undo it. And she still believed, or at least she was trying to believe, that she'd done the right thing. But as she sat there in the growing darkness, with her daughter locked in her room and her husband far away, Victoria felt the first real stirrings of doubt. Helen's last words kept coming back to her. Please listen to your daughter. Why had she said that? What had she wanted Victoria to hear? Victoria stood up and climbed the stairs slowly. She stopped outside Lily's door and raised her hand to knock. But before she could, she heard something that made her freeze. Lily was crying again, but she was also talking, whispering to herself in that way children do when they think no one can hear. I'm sorry, Miss Helen. Lily was saying between sobs. I'm sorry Mommy hurt you. I'm sorry I couldn't make her stop. I'm sorry. Victoria's hand dropped to her side. She stood there in the hallway, listening to her daughter apologize to someone who wasn't there for something that wasn't her fault. What had Lily been trying to tell her yesterday? What had she missed in her rush to protect, to act, to be the good mother she always tried to be? Victoria wanted to open the door, wanted to ask, wanted to finally listen the way Helen had told her to, but she didn't. Instead, she walked to her own bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on her bed fully clothed. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow when Daniel got home, everything would make sense. He'd help her understand. He'd tell her she did the right thing, but deep down, in a place she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge yet, Victoria was starting to suspect that she'd made a terrible mistake, and somewhere across town, in a small house that Victoria had never seen, Helen sat at her kitchen table with an ice pack pressed to her cheek, wondering if that sweet little girl was okay, and praying that her mother would finally listen to what she'd been trying to say. Daniel came home the next evening just as the sun was setting. Victoria heard his car pull into the driveway and felt relief wash over her. Finally, someone else would be here to help her figure out what was going on with Lily. Someone else to share the weight of this strange, uncomfortable feeling that had settled over their house like a fog. She met him at the door and he pulled her into a hug. He smelled like airports and coffee, but she didn't care. She held on maybe a little longer than usual. Hey, what's wrong? Daniel asked, pulling back to look at her face. He always could read her too well. Nothing, I just missed you, Victoria said, forcing a smile. How was your trip? Long. Where's Lily? I brought her something. Victoria hesitated. She's in her room. She's been up there most of the day. Daniel frowned. Is she sick? No, she's been in a mood lately. You know how kids are. But Daniel was already heading toward the stairs, pulling off his tie as he went. Lily, Daddy's home. Usually this would result in thundering footsteps and Lily launching herself into her father's arms. But today there was only silence. Daniel looked back at Victoria, his frown deepening. Then he climbed the stairs 2 at a time. Victoria followed slowly, her heart beginning to race. She wasn't sure why she felt nervous. It was just Daniel. Her husband. Lily's father. Everything would be fine now that he was home. Daniel knocked on Lily's door. Hey, Princess, can I come in? There was a pause, and then they heard the lock click. The door opened just a crack and then wider when Lily saw it was her father. She threw herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his waist and burying her face in his shirt. Whoa! Hey, Daniel said, kneeling down to her level. I missed you too, sweetheart. He pulled back to look at her face, and Victoria saw his expression change. Lily's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept properly in days. What's going on? Daniel asked gently, brushing Lily's hair back from her face. Why are you so sad? Lily's eyes flicked to Victoria, standing in the doorway, and then back to her father. She shook her head. Nothing. Lily, come on. Talk to me. I can't, Lily whispered, and fresh tears started rolling down her cheeks. Daniel looked at Victoria with confusion and concern. Victoria shrugged helplessly. She'd been trying to get Lily to talk for 2 days with no success. How about we go downstairs and have some dinner together? Daniel suggested. Just the three of us. We can talk about my trip and you can tell me what's been going on here. Lily nodded reluctantly and they all went downstairs. Victoria heated up leftovers while Daniel told them about his business meetings, trying to keep things light and normal. But the tension at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lily pushed her food around her plate, barely eating anything. Victoria couldn't eat either. Only Daniel seemed unaware of how wrong everything felt. After dinner, Daniel suggested they watch a movie together, something they used to do as a family all the time. They settled on the couch, Lily between her parents. But halfway through the movie, Victoria noticed that Lily had fallen asleep against Daniel's shoulder. Her small body finally relaxed for the first time in days. She's exhausted, Daniel whispered, looking down at their daughter with concern. Victoria, what's really going on? This isn't like her. Victoria felt the words rising in her throat. She needed to tell him, needed to explain what had happened and get his support, his reassurance that she'd done the right thing. Something happened while you were gone, she began quietly. With the housekeeper. Daniel's body tensed. What kind of something? Victoria told him everything. Or at least everything from her perspective. How she'd come home early and found Helen with her hands on Lily's face. How Lily had been crying. How she'd fired Helen on the spot and made her leave. As she talked, she tried to make Daniel understand the fear she'd felt. The protective instinct that had kicked in. The certainty that she was doing the right thing. But as she watched Daniel's face, she didn't see the understanding and agreement she'd expected. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like horror. Wait, Daniel said slowly, carefully, like he was trying very hard to stay calm. You fired her? Just like that? Without asking any questions? I saw what I saw, Daniel. Our daughter was crying and that woman had her hands on her. Did you ask Lily what happened? Victoria felt defensive. She was upset. I didn't want to traumatize her more by making her relive it. So you didn't ask her? Daniel repeated. Not then and not since. She won't talk about it. She locks herself in her room and won't talk to me. You saw how she was at dinner. Daniel looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully against him. Very gently he picked her up, cradling her like he used to when she was a baby. I'm going to put her in bed, he said. Then we need to talk. Victoria sat alone on the couch, listening to Daniel's footsteps overhead as he tucked Lily in. Her hands were shaking slightly. Something in Daniel's tone had scared her. He wasn't reacting the way she'd thought he would. He was supposed to be angry at Helen, protective of Lily, supportive of what Victoria had done. Instead, he seemed angry at her. When Daniel came back downstairs, his face was serious. I need to talk to Lily, he said. Alone, tomorrow morning. Why alone? I'm her mother. Because she clearly can't talk in front of you, Victoria. Haven't you noticed that? She won't even look at you. The words stung, but Victoria couldn't deny them. Fine, she said stiffly. Do whatever you think is best. That night, they barely spoke to each other. Victoria lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's breathing beside her. She wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the strange distance that had opened between them, but she didn't know how. The next morning, Victoria made breakfast while Daniel went to wake Lily. She heard them talking upstairs, their voices low and muffled. Then they came down together and Daniel gave Victoria a look that clearly said, Give us some space. Victoria took her coffee to the back porch, but she stood near the door where she could hear them talking in the kitchen. She knew it was wrong to eavesdrop, but she couldn't help herself. This was her daughter, her family. She had a right to know what was being said. Lily, sweetheart, she heard Daniel say gently, I need you to tell me what happened the day Miss Helen left. Can you do that for me? There was a long silence. Then Lily's small voice, barely audible. You promise you won't be mad? I promise. Just tell me the truth, and then Lily did. And with every word, Victoria felt her world starting to crumble. Lily had been playing outside in the garden, she told her father. She was running around by the stone path, not being careful like she should have been. She tripped and fell hard on her knees. One of them was bleeding pretty bad, and it scared her. She'd called for her mom, but Victoria wasn't home yet. She'd come inside crying, looking for help, and that's when Miss Helen found her. Miss Helen had been so nice about it, Lily said. She didn't scold her for being careless or making a mess. She just took her to the living room and got the first aid kit. She cleaned Lily's knee so gently, talking to her the whole time to distract her from the pain. She put on a bandage with little flowers on it. And then she checked Lily's face because there was a small scratch near her eye from when she'd fallen. That's when Lily had really started crying, not because she was hurt, but because she was scared. Scared that her mom would be mad at her for not being careful, scared that she'd be in trouble. And Miss Helen had cupped her face in her hands, wiped away her tears, and told her it was okay. That accidents happen, that she was brave for not crying more, that her mom would understand. And that was the exact moment Victoria had walked in. Victoria stood on the porch, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, as she listened to her daughter's words. She remembered that moment. Remembered Helen's hands on Lily's face. Remembered the tears on her daughter's cheeks. But she'd seen it all wrong. Completely, terribly wrong. I tried to tell Mommy Lily was crying now in the kitchen. I tried to explain that Miss Helen was helping me, that she made my knee better, but Mommy wouldn't listen.
She just kept yelling.
And then Lily's voice broke. She hit Miss Helen, Daddy. She hit her really hard. And it was my fault. Miss Helen got hurt because she was being nice to me, and now she's gone and it's all my fault. Oh, baby, no. Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? None of it. Victoria's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on one of the porch chairs, her coffee slopping over the side of the mug and burning her hand. She barely felt it. She heard Daniel's chair scrape back. Lily, can you go up to your room for a little bit? I need to talk to your mom. Lily's footsteps ran up the stairs, and then Daniel was opening the porch door, his face a mixture of anger and disappointment that Victoria had never seen before. Tell me you heard that, he said quietly. Victoria couldn't speak. She just nodded. Do you understand what you did? Daniel's voice was shaking. Helen was helping our daughter. She was taking care of her. And you, God, Victoria, you hit her. You physically assaulted someone who was being kind to our child. I didn't know, Victoria whispered. Because you didn't ask. Daniel's control finally broke. You didn't ask Lily what happened. You didn't ask Helen. You just saw what you wanted to see and reacted. And now Lily thinks it's her fault that you hurt someone. Our 7-year-old daughter has been torturing herself for 3 days thinking she got someone hurt because they showed her kindness. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. I thought I was protecting her. From what? From someone who actually cared about her. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, pacing the porch. I need you to be honest with me right now. Really honest. If Helen had been white, would you have reacted the same way? The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to say yes, of course, but the words wouldn't come, because suddenly she was remembering things. The way her mother had clutched her purse tighter when certain people walked by. The warnings she'd heard growing up about being careful around certain neighborhoods. The assumptions she'd absorbed without even realizing it. I don't know, she finally whispered, and the admission felt like breaking apart. Daniel looked at her with something that might have been pity. That's what I thought. What do I do? Victoria asked desperately. Daniel, what do I do? I don't know, he said. But you need to figure it out. Because right now our daughter is upstairs blaming herself for your mistake. And somewhere out there is a woman who did nothing wrong except be kind to a child, and you assaulted her for it. He turned to go back inside. I'm going to check on Lily. I think you need some time to think about what kind of person you want to be. The door closed behind him, leaving Victoria alone on the porch. She sat there as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, as her coffee grew cold in her hands as the reality of what she'd done crashed over her in waves. She'd been so sure, so absolutely certain that she was right, that she was protecting her daughter, that she was being a good mother. But she'd been wrong. Not just wrong, but horribly, harmfully wrong. And she'd hurt an innocent person because of her own blind spots, her own prejudices that she'd never wanted to admit she had. Victoria thought about Helen's face in that moment. Not angry, not defensive, just sad. And those last words, please listen to your daughter. Helen had known. Even as Victoria was hitting her, even as she was being thrown out unfairly, Helen had known that if Victoria would just listen, she'd understand the truth. And she'd tried one last time to make Victoria see, but Victoria hadn't listened. Not to Helen, not to Lily, not to anyone but her own assumptions and fears. She set down her cold coffee and put her face in her hands. She'd broken something. Something in her daughter, something in her marriage, something in herself, and she didn't know if she could fix it, but she knew she had to try. Victoria sat on that porch for over an hour, maybe longer. Time felt strange, like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. When she finally went back inside, the house was quiet. Daniel had taken Lily out, she realized, probably to get her away from Victoria for a while. She couldn't even blame him. She walked through the rooms of her perfect house, seeing it differently now. All this space, all this luxury, and she'd used it to hurt someone who had less than her. Someone who'd done nothing but show kindness to her child. Victoria pulled out her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled to Helen's number, the one she'd saved when she first hired her. Her finger hovered over it for a long moment. What would she even say? Sorry I hit you? Sorry I accused you of something terrible? Sorry I saw you as a threat instead of a person? She put the phone down. A call wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough, really, but a phone call felt like the coward's way out. Instead, Victoria did something she'd never done before. She started researching Helen. Not in a creepy way, but trying to learn about her, understand her life. She found an old online profile, mostly empty but with a few details. Helen had worked in housekeeping for over 20 years. Before that, she'd been a nursing assistant. There was a mention of a son, a mention of caring for her elderly mother. Victoria felt sick. Helen had a family, a life, dreams and struggles and people who loved her, and Victoria had treated her like she was nothing. She spent the afternoon searching for information, trying to find an address, anything that would help her locate Helen and apologize properly. But she came up empty. Helen hadn't listed her home address on any of her work documents, and Victoria realized she'd never bothered to ask. In 3 months of Helen working in her home, Victoria had never once asked her anything personal. Where she lived, how her family was doing, what her life was like outside these walls. The realization made her feel even worse. When Daniel and Lily came home that evening, Lily's eyes were still red, but she seemed calmer. Daniel barely looked at Victoria. He made dinner while Victoria sat at the kitchen island, useless and lost in her own home. I need to find her, Victoria said suddenly. I need to find Helen and apologize. Daniel didn't turn around from the stove. Good luck with that. I've been trying her number all day. She's not answering. Can you blame her? Victoria's voice cracked. After what I did. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table coloring in one of her books. She looked up at the sound of her mother's voice. You're going to say sorry to Miss Helen? Victoria turned to her daughter, and for the first time in days, Lily was actually looking at her. I'm going to try, baby. I'm going to try really hard. Will she come back? Lily asked, and the hope in her voice was painful to hear. I don't know, Victoria said honestly. But even if she doesn't, I need to tell her I was wrong. I need to make it right. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Helen, about where she might be, about the fear she must have felt in that moment when Victoria struck her. Around 2 a.m, Victoria gave up on sleep and went to her home office. She started going through the paperwork from when she'd hired Helen, looking for any clue about where she might live. Finally, buried in an old email, she found it. A reference from Helen's previous employer. Victoria's hands shook as she opened it. The letter was glowing, talking about Helen's reliability, her warmth, her excellent care of both home and children. At the bottom was a note. Helen can be reached at her home address if needed for future reference. And there it was. An address in a neighborhood Victoria had never been to, on the other side of the city. Victoria wrote it down, her heart pounding. But then she looked at the clock. It was 2:30 a.m. She couldn't show up at Helen's house now. She'd have to wait until tomorrow. The waiting felt impossible. She went back to bed but still couldn't sleep. She rehearsed what she'd say 100 different ways. Each version sounded hollow and inadequate. How do you apologize for something like this? How do you make it right when you'd been so completely harmfully wrong? The next morning, Victoria was up before dawn. She showered and dressed carefully, not in her usual designer clothes, but in something simple. She didn't want to show up looking like what she was, a rich woman trying to buy forgiveness. She just wanted to look like a person who'd made a terrible mistake and needed to own up to it. Daniel found her in the kitchen, already dressed, staring at her coffee. You're really going to do this? He asked. I have to, Victoria said. I found her address. I'm going to go to her house. Daniel nodded slowly. Want me to come with you? Victoria thought about it, then shook her head. No, this is something I need to do myself, but thank you. It was the first real moment between them since he'd gotten home. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a small crack in the wall that had built up between them. What about Lily? Victoria asked. School starts in an hour. I'll take her, Daniel said. You go do what you need to do. Victoria drove across the city as the sun was rising, following her GPS into neighborhoods she'd never visited. The houses got smaller, closer together. The streets were narrower. She passed a corner store with bars on the windows, a bus stop where people were already waiting for their morning commute, a small park with worn playground equipment. Helen's house was in the middle of a modest block. It was small but well-maintained, with a neat front yard and flowers in window boxes. Victoria parked across the street and sat there for a long moment, gathering her courage. What if Helen slammed the door in her face? What if she called the police? What if she refused to even listen? Victoria would deserve all of it and more. But she'd come this far. She couldn't turn back now. Victoria got out of her car and walked up to the front door. Her legs felt shaky. She raised her hand and knocked. 3 soft taps that sounded too loud in the quiet morning. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps inside. The door opened and there was Helen, wearing a simple bathrobe, her gray hair pulled back, her face showing surprise and something else. Not anger, but wariness. They stood there looking at each other. Victoria could see the faint bruise on Helen's cheek, fading now but still visible. The bruise she had caused Mrs. Ashford, Helen said quietly. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Helen, Victoria's carefully rehearsed words disappeared. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Helen didn't say anything. She just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, waiting. Can I please talk to you? Victoria asked. I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I need to explain. Or no, not explain. There's no explanation that makes what I did okay. I just need to apologize properly. To say it to your face. Helen studied her for a long moment. Then, to Victoria's surprise, she stepped back and opened the door wider. You better come in. Victoria followed her inside. The house was small but immaculately clean and filled with warmth. There were photos on the walls. Helen with a young man in a graduation cap. Helen with an elderly woman who must be her mother. Family gatherings and holidays captured in frames. A life, full and rich, that Victoria had never bothered to see. Helen led her to a small living room and gestured to a chair. Victoria sat while Helen settled on the couch, keeping distance between them. I don't even know where to start, Victoria said, her voice shaking. What I did was unforgivable. I hit you. I accused you of something horrible. I fired you and threw you out without even asking what happened. And the worst part is, I know why I did it. Helen raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. I saw what I expected to see, Victoria continued, tears starting to fall. I saw my daughter crying and you touching her, and instead of asking questions, instead of thinking, I just reacted. And if I'm being honest with myself, really honest, I reacted that way partly because she forced herself to say it. Because you're black. And I have prejudices I didn't even want to admit I had. Assumptions I inherited and never questioned. And you paid the price for that. You and Lily both. Helen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. Lily told us what really happened, Victoria said. How she fell and hurt herself. How you helped her, cleaned her up, made her feel better. You were being kind to my daughter and I attacked you for it. Not just fired you, but actually hit you. And I have to live with that. I have to live with knowing I did that to someone who did nothing wrong. Mrs. Ashford, Helen said, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. Please call me Victoria. Helen nodded. Victoria, then. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you understand what scared me most about that day? Helen leaned forward slightly. It wasn't the slap, though that hurt. It wasn't even losing my job. It was knowing that you could have said anything about me, and people would have believed you, because you're wealthy and white, and I'm neither of those things. You could have called the police and said I did something to your daughter, and my life would have been over. My reputation, my career, maybe even my freedom. That's what kept me up that night. The knowledge of how powerless I was in that situation. Victoria felt like she couldn't breathe. She hadn't even thought about that. Hadn't considered that Helen might have been afraid of her, of what she could do with her position and privilege. I never would have. Victoria started. But Helen held up a hand. You don't know what you would have done, Helen said gently but firmly. You were in a state, and that's the point. People like me, we have to be careful all the time. We have to think about how we're perceived, what people might assume, how a simple misunderstanding could destroy our lives. That's a weight you've never had to carry. You're right, Victoria whispered. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Helen sighed, a long, tired sound. I appreciate you coming here, she said. I appreciate you being honest about your prejudices. That takes courage, and not many people are willing to do it. It's the least I could do, Victoria said. But I want to do more. I want to make this right as much as I can. I know money doesn't fix this, but I want to pay you for the wages you lost. And for pain and suffering and I don't know what else, but please tell me what I can do. Helen looked at her for a long moment. Why, she asked. Why do you want to make it right? Because you feel guilty? Because your husband is angry? Because your daughter is upset? All of those things, Victoria admitted. But also because it is right. Because you deserved better. Because I need to be better. Helen nodded slowly. I'll accept payment for lost wages. That's fair. But Victoria, if you really want to make this right, you need to do more than write a check. You need to do the work. The real work of examining your biases, of changing how you see the world, of raising your daughter to be better than you were. I will, Victoria promised. I'm trying. Good, Helen said. She stood up, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. I hope you mean that. Victoria stood too, wiping her eyes. I know this doesn't fix anything, but thank you. Thank you for even letting me in your door. Thank you for listening. Helen walked her to the door. As Victoria stepped outside, she turned back. Helen, there's one more thing. Lily misses you. She's been devastated, and I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to see her? Not to work for us. I wouldn't ask that. Just to let her apologize, to let her know that what happened wasn't her fault. Helen's expression softened at the mention of Lily. That little girl has nothing to apologize for. But yes, I'd like to see her. To make sure she's okay. Victoria felt a weight lift slightly from her chest. Thank you. Thank you so much. As she walked back to her car, Victoria felt different. Not better, exactly. The guilt and shame were still there, and they should be. But she felt like maybe, just maybe, she'd taken the first real step toward becoming someone her daughter could be proud of. The road ahead was long, she knew that. But at least now she was finally on it.